And obviously Stonewall and places like Stonewall, which there were very few and far between, were sanctuaries. And and so it was, we want to dive a little bit deeper today. Hey y'all, welcome back to Queer 101. I am Peppermint.
And I'm Hugh the Historian.
And we are so excited to be back this week. As you may or may not know. Oh, go.
Oh, no. I was saying I just want to keep the conversation going. It was so much fun last week talking to Tourmaline.
It really was. Was it last week, though? It was 2 weeks ago. We talked to Tourmaline.
Is it?
Yeah,
oh, God.
Yeah, time's flying. Time's flying.
I can't keep track of everything. With everything happening in the news and the world, it's like, when did anything happen? But the point is, the conversation was so good.
Yeah, it was a great conversation, and I really enjoyed what we kind of got into last week, which was sort of our immediate thoughts about the book. Of course, the book, when we say the book, we're talking about the book Marsha by Tourmaline. If you're just tuning into this for the first time, we featured this book on our book club. We're featuring it currently this month, and it's a brilliant, brilliant book, and so you should check it out. Absolutely.
This is the beautiful cover. If you don't have your own copy, please look at this magnificence. And the inside is just as good.
Yeah. Can you give us a little, like, just a one blurb about what it is and who Marsha was for people who are living under a rock? I don't know.
I mean, I think it is the first significant biography of Marsha P. Johnson, the icon, the legend, the saint of Christopher Street, the performer who inspired Andy Warhol and performed with the Hot Peaches, the activist who helped start Pride as we know it, who was part of the Stonewall Rebellion, who was part of the Gay Liberation Front, who founded Star House. I mean, the list of things that Marsha did just goes on and on and on. Mm-hmm. And what's incredible is that Tourmaline has brought it all together for the first time in one place. Years of research, and then given us these incredible thoughts based out of Marsha's own life about how we can live our lives as queer people facing harsh conditions today.
Yeah, and for those of you who may not know the name or be terribly familiar with her story, that's why. Because there wasn't really a very comprehensive and deep dive into Marsha's story in that way. But she is, when you hear Stonewall, she is one of the most prominent names that you should have taken away, or that people were probably referring to when they were talking about the people at Stonewall. But as we learn in this book, it's her story. Obviously, her story is so much deeper. Obviously, begins way before Stonewall and continues way after. And I think that's really interesting because there's such an example. People use her as an example. People use her efforts and everything as an example during literally during the evening of the rebellion, but like during that era, as an example and as sort of a window into. Well, I guess on base level, people use it as an example to be like, this is what white gay men had to endure. On a deeper level, people understand that this is what people of color and femmes and sex workers were going through if they dive deeper into the experiences of those people. But then we can also hold up examples of like the Black Cat Tavern and Compton's Cafe to parallel those experiences. These are of instances that happened before Stonewall, of course. But if we go even deeper, then we can see, and the thing that I think is a shame, or I guess on the positive, I'm happy that we're able to talk about it these days, is the kind of example that she led in her life, particularly as a trans woman after Stonewall, is also just as remarkable in my eyes, especially considering what she was up against. We were just talking, and we might talk about, maybe we'll talk about this more in the next episode, about the atmosphere and how anti-queer it was. And obviously we know that, like, literally it was, all these things were against the law, how you presented, who you interact with, and things like that. You could be arrested or punishable, or punished socially and lose your job, and yada, yada, yada.
Attacked.
Assaulted, among other things. But it also, so in that regard, this systemic oppression, it ran throughout everything, not just the cops coming to get you, and like you could just do anything you wanted until the cops came. It was in your day life, in your work life, in your family life, and on the street, like outside on the street. These were places of great danger, and obviously Stonewall and places like Stonewall, which there were very few and far between, were sanctuaries. And so we want to dive a little bit deeper today into the sanctuary, into the freedom, into the music. The thing that I loved the most, and we talked about that in the conversation, was this book was so descriptive about how things sounded, how things felt, and the music, the songs that were playing on the jukebox when the raid happened. I heard it through the grapevine, which is so like, I heard you were gay. Like, it's so, to me, it's so like your tea, we spilled your tea and now we're coming. Like, that's what I got from that. What did you get when you like heard that was the song that was playing on the jukebox?
Yeah, I thought a lot about the importance, and we talked about this a little bit too, the importance of dancing and that embodiment, the things that make you feel good in your body. Because, yes, queerness is an identity, it's in the mind, it's in the air, but it's also something we experience in how we live, how we walk through space. And you were saying the danger was everywhere. And so to have a space where you could celebrate your queerness, where you could be as gay as you want or as femme as you want and embody that. So I was thinking about, what were the songs that I was going out to in, my clubbing days? What were the songs that made me feel a certain kind of way? And how that is a continual parallel. We may have lost so many things of Marsha's story, which Tourmaline has rescued for us. So many quotes from her that we did not have and have not seen before. But that idea of Marsha as this embodiment of liberation on the dance floor, and then the way she took that out into the street. There was a reason she was called the Saint of Christopher Street. It's because she brought that liberatory energy, which for most people, even if you were going to the bars, you had to hide that part of you away in the back room at the Stonewall. And when you stepped back out on the street, you straightened up and you locked it down, And Marsha brought that everywhere. And I think that's part of the reason why, even for the folks who don't know much about her actual life and her actual experiences, Marsha is an icon of Stonewall and of liberation, because she brought that energy to places where most people did not. And that's, I think, what's so amazing about her, among all the work that she did. That fearlessness in her joy.
And then, yeah, that fearlessness, it sounds trite to call it braveness, and sounds kind of cliche, but I was watching a YouTube video, as one does, and it was a reaction to the film Hidden Figures. Sometimes when and this is clearly not unique. It's a thing. Instead of watching an old movie again that I love, now I'll watch a YouTube reaction, which is so. It's like, where are we in this world? That I'm watching other people watch the movie and then getting my entertainment and deriving my entertainment from that. And so I watched a YouTube reaction to the movie, to Hidden Figures. Completely unrelated, but I was watching the brilliant performances there, and the really captivating real life stories of these women who were instrumental in the space race to get the United States to get NASA and an American astronaut on the moon. And the scene with Taraji P. Henson, where she is the key mathematician and engineer whose work and whose brain power is the one thing that's literally saves the day. And she has an immense amount of pressure, way more pressure than they're tasking her with solving this impossible to solve math equation that would get them to space. She was
And
also
if she doesn't
tasked
solve it,
with
they all blow up.
yeah, they all blow up. And so, yeah, she's got the astronauts' life on their hands. There's a lot of money in the line, and it needs to be done immediately. She also needs to check the math of all the other people, the white people, because she's the only black person in the room, all the other engineers who are white. She's got to double check their math to make sure that theirs is the right thing, because they recognize that her math is superior, her work is superior. So she's got to now go through and make sure everybody else's work is in there. And then she's just got to live her normal life, like as a worker in that environment. And she can't even use the bathroom in the same building. It's a half a mile away, and, every single day. And then the boss comes down on her, why are you so gone? And that scene where she snaps and she, expresses herself, I have to think that is also the backdrop that people like Marsha P. Johnson were existing in, on top of their queerness, on the street, at work, in these places. And so of course their stories are going to get lost and buried. And of course, they're experiencing so much persecution. And that was a cis woman who was dealing with that in that story of Hidden Figures. And gay white men were experiencing so much. We talked about this, and we talked about this off camera, about the amount of discrimination that just gay white guys were experiencing, let alone a black femme person. It's like, gosh, I don't know where my point is, but yes, she was brave. That's my point.
You know what that actually, though, you know what you reminded me of? Because I forgot, there was something which I was like, wait, Marvin Gaye. Something was like flipping in my head about hidden queer histories and the toll they take. And I finally remembered. Do you know the dark history of Marvin Gaye's death?
Yes. I finally watched the documentary. Did you watch this documentary?
Yes. Whew. For those of you at home who do not know what we're talking about, Marvin Gaye, the musician, was beaten to death by his own father, who was a minister and also a cross-dresser, as the term at the time would have been. We don't know really anything about how Marvin Gaye's father identified. We don't know, but that kind of pressure that he was under as a black Christian minister, married with children, one of whom was a famous musician, while also harboring these queer desires that he couldn't live out, right? This is all happening in the same context in which Marsha is able to live this incredible, out, public, difficult life. And yet, and Pep, you brought this up in our interview, and I thought that was so important, and yet, to this day, people routinely try to deny that Marsha was trans. And it shocks me, that she was able to live out and proud when all of these other people, like Marvin Gaye Sr., could not. And yet still to this day, despite all the overwhelming evidence, people are still denying it. And I would say I can't believe it, except it feels like people still do that about trans people who are alive today, so I guess I can believe it pretty easily.
Yeah, I mean, and to be fair, I mean, it reminds me of the Derek Barry Willem clip in Drag Race, where they're talking about Stonewall, and Derek Barry's like, and a lot of people died at Stonewall, and Derek Barry's like, nobody died at Stonewall. And that's because even our bastions of queer excellence many of them didn't, I can't say Derek knows now, didn't know our own history, because where were we going to find it? You know what I mean?
Right. Especially before the internet. Like, before the internet,
exactly.
If something wasn't printed on a piece of paper within a mile of my house, that might as well not have existed. There was no real information out there. And even people who, we today think of as the most famous, obvious, queer people from recent history. Your, celebrities like David Bowie and Elton John and Freddie Mercury and George Michael. None of them were able to be out easily and exist as themselves in this time period. They came out, they went back into the closet, they were forced out, they were hounded. So it's like you said, if, white guys who are incredible celebrities with tons of money are facing this kind of scrutiny and this kind of persecution, how are we ever going to know a true history, right? Have they had to hide so much? How are you and me and David and David Perry going to know the actual truth of this situation?
All this to say, music, liberation through music, rebellion through music, and what that really meant to a lot of those club goers or people that were in Stonewall and through over the next several years and couple of decades as the queer rights liberation movement continues to blossom. But before we do that, that was a hell of an intro. We should mention what we're up to this week. Hugh, should we tell them what we're up to soon?
Our big exciting news that we're going to be interviewing the one, the only, the legendary Sulu from the Starship Enterprise, George Takei. Oh, I cannot wait! I've actually been reading his book, It Rhymes with Takei, which for those of you who do not have your own copy, you may notice that it is a graphic novel, which is why, where is it that we're going to be interviewing him, Pep?
At ComicCon. I mean, it only makes sense. Star Trek has had a huge presence, and rightfully so, has its place on the mantle at every Comic-Con. And now we have the opportunity to go and speak with one of the legends of Star Trek, one of the icons who are still with us, of course, because there's not as many left from the very original series that are still with us, who we can talk to about not only Star Trek, which is interesting and that'll be fun and everything that's in the book, but his experiences as a Japanese American, living through the same time period. Here we are. You know what I mean? This is a bit of, wildly, well, slightly early. It was earlier, to be fair. Slightly earlier, but not that different in terms of the sort of the age range that we're talking about here. So
we'll be joining
so I'm
him
excited about
on
it.
Stage Thursday, October 9th, 6:30 p.m. at the Javits Center in the River Pavilion Pro, Stage 2. It's a big room because we've got a lot of people coming. So come on down, join us there, check it out. Get your tickets now. I think they are available.
And it is an historic thing because it's our first live podcast episode. So that's for those of you that are in New York, because there's a lot of people who are listening to this who might not be in New York. If you are in New York, then please come on by. And maybe I don't know, I have no idea. I'm just wishful thinking. Maybe there's a way for people to experience the Comic-Con remotely. But if you don't, that's okay, because we are going to be releasing this and making sure that those of you who aren't in New York will be able to see it.
Oh yeah, we've got a lot to say about It Rhymes with Takei. Also, if you, like me, did not know how to properly pronounce George Takei's name, this book is so helpful because it rhymes with Takei because he's gay. That's how I've been remembering it this whole time. Gay. It rhymes with Takei.
Gay. It's the truth. So
you've got a lot coming up with that.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot coming up, a lot to look forward to. A busy, busy fall. But here we are. We got to talk about the music. Our discussion the past couple of weeks has been fantastic. And if it's not obvious, this is just our third episode of the brand new format that we are doing, where we will be doing a weekly. We're bringing you all the goodness weekly, and we would love to hear from you. So again, of course, before we jump into the conversation, if you've made it this far into the video, please make sure you click like. You might as well subscribe because, you're basically one of the family now. Hello, and
you're here already.
You are here, and click that notification bell. Do all those things, and you'll be notified of the next video that we drop next week. And it doesn't cost you anything, but it really does help us out in the algorithm. And allows other people to find these discussions, which are being censored left and right. So get to it.
Yeah, if you want this history to be here for the next generation so that they're not left scrambling the way we were looking for Marsha's history, please like it, subscribe, and share it with folks today, tomorrow, the rest of the week. we're here for you. And we've got so much to talk about. That's why it took us so long to get through our introduction just to this moment to talk about music. We are talking about queer music, queer liberation, Marvin Gaye, Marsha P. Johnson. If you have queer music that is like the embodiment of liberation for you, drop it in the comments. Let us know. We want to hear about what gets you moving. What song was on the jukebox when you came out, or when your bar was raided by the police, or at other significant moments in your queer life. Unfortunately for me, I have to admit, Pep, that a lot of the music that was in my early coming out life was pretty bad gay bar dance remixes of like Jock Jams Volume 1. I can't hear...
No, wait. Can we set the stage for them a little bit for people who have not yet read the book? You know, we've heard about the Stonewall riots. People call them, I call them a rebellion, an uprising where the scene was fraught. The bar was a mob-run gay bar where everyone had to be basically closeted, and when the police would come in on occasionally for check-ins or the occasional raid, people had to like stop dancing with the partner that they were with, and they needed to, you know, just start dancing with a lesbian or start dancing with somebody else, or like, you know, completely change the situation. And so that was the tension that was constantly, probably always in the air. And at the same time, you know, they had this music that was playing that was probably much like what you're expressing and what a lot of people have felt. You know, some of their favorite songs, some of the things that just they loved hearing and they could kind of really connect to. But the song that was playing at the time was I Heard It Through the Grapevine. That really speaks to me. You know, it feels really like, you know, because everyone had to keep their lives a secret. Mm-hmm. You know, so yeah, hearing it through the grapevine is like that's the song, you know. But in addition to that, you know, Marsha had an interesting connection to music. You know, being on the back of a cover of an Earth, Wind and Fire album, and obviously perform as a drag entertainer. And so like music was clearly a part of their lives. And people describe the music of the 60s, as they do with every decade, at least leading up to the 2000s, that kind of gets all mixed up, as really, really key to the revolution that was happening, both sexually, both, you know, socially. When we talk about, you know, getting ready, like going into the war in Vietnam and fighting back against that, you know, obviously the civil rights era, the music was such a key component and a backdrop for that. You know, we had Woodstock, you know, and so Stonewall was happening at that same time. You know, this was all playing out around that same time. So of course the music is going to be really key to not only what people remember when they talk about it and how they felt, and probably might have been the song that was playing in their heads when these drag queens were picking up them bricks and fighting back against them cops. And so it's really, really a key portion and a really pertinent part of the conversation. And so the book does a great job for the first time of expressing that and letting us know what type of music that they were listening to and how they were feeling during that time. And so we had a little bit of a conversation last time about how we felt when we were on the dance floor. So so please tell me about it, Hugh.
Well, I was just thinking about like the songs that I remember, and it's, you know, it's Pump Up the Jam. It's Crystal Water.
The jam.
Pump
She's homeless.
I was thinking 100% Pure Love, but She's Homeless. It is 100%. Weird that She's Homeless was such a club hit, because really the chorus was just yelling She's Homeless over and over again.
I know, which is so bad.
Yeah. It is.
I mean, it was
so
like
indicative of where we were at the time.
Then people are just dancing, and it's like, yeah.
In her defense,
but I
though,
mean,
the speakers were really bad, and you couldn't make out the words very often. That's what I
you know, it wasn't that clear. Not to mock Miss Crystal Waters. That got a chance to sit next to her last year.
She is incredible. I'm talking about the speaker systems. I'm talking about the radios. Not her. Not her. It is entirely
Yeah.
on the
It
technology.
was there was a sort of relaxed jazz, a relaxed nature to it that up against, with the style of Sarah Vaughan, her aunt, who
Ethel
was
Waters.
obviously, Ethel Waters. What did I say? Sarah Vaughan? Ethel Waters, who was obviously a legendary jazz singer, but
And
with
famously a
house with
lesbian.
a yes, with a house beat sped up, it might not be as easy to understand all of the music. But yeah, you're
Yeah.
right. Like those are I think that when we think of I think the 90s was the best decade, and I'm a little bit biased, obviously, because I was alive during that time, but the music
You were a
had
baby,
so much to do with
one,
that.
maybe two,
Yeah.
in the club.
I was old enough to enjoy MTV, that's for sure. And the MTV era was such it's definitely the top. Even though MTV started in the early 80s, I would say MTV really exploded into a juggernaut of entertainment in the 90s. Late 80s,
absolutely.
early 90s for sure. But MTV was absolutely key for like being the new way, the new method that so many of us would receive our music, especially if you couldn't get to the dance clubs and things like that. For the first time, we were able to see artists like RuPaul and people like Prince doing, having, because MTV gave us the visual, right? If you couldn't get to the concert. So we were able to see these people flirting with and playing with, whether it's in the 80s with like sort of like gender expression. Everyone had eyeliner. Everyone had eyeliner and big hair and heels, no matter who you were. And then in the
Catch
90s,
the video for "Spin Me Right Round Baby" and you will be amazed. Pete Burns.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah, very much. You're like, who's this lady who's singing? And then even in the 90s, where people were like, I won't say the word that they would use is experimenting with sexuality, right? And that's what everyone would talk about. That was like big in the 90s. But that also played out in the videos. And so in addition to having like these club bangers, that were really liberating in all these clubs, I would imagine, definitely in the 90s, on the dance floor, I had the same sort of experience. Even before that, like I would walk down the hall in school and get teased, but when I was performing some kind of dance, like a Janet Jackson dance number or something in the talent show, or with my little dance club, whatever, or as a cheerleader, I was captain of the cheerleading squad, and I was like such a target.
know that.
But honey, I had those girls doing that dance number to that music, and honey, everybody was like, "Oh my God!" Like as soon as it turns to entertainment, they're with it. And that maybe also speaks to like sort of like even going back within my ancestry, like sort of like black folks as entertainment in places where they couldn't even, speaking about the Waters and Sarah Vaughan and Billie Holiday and so on, and even before that, where we weren't even allowed to enjoy these spaces or be in these spaces, that were segregated, but we could perform there. And this is only like a decade or two before Stonewall, right? I mean, obviously way before that, but leading up to, many of these spaces were segregated,
Yeah. And I think about how, like in the 1920s and 30s, we get the first like explicit laws against gay sex in America. And at the same time, the pansy craze was happening, where it was really popular to have gay, male, effeminate, trans women, they did not have this language, performers in bars. You can see them in films made in the 1930s. Check out Call Her Savage, incredible film where they go down to Greenwich Village specifically to check out the pansy performers, right? So they can make their lives illegal, they can say they didn't exist, harass them on the streets, but on the stage, if you're entertaining, there's kind of like a safety almost, or a tiny bit of you can take up that space, but only that space. That's where you get to be. And that carries on through.
And I think that's, I wouldn't like to think, but I have to think, I can only think that in these, in those times where it was so oppressive and so your behavior, your movement, who you talked to and how you spoke, literally, were so restricted and so monitored, and so probably fraught with tension and fear, that it forced us into these coded ways of interacting with each other, coded language and ways of dressing that would signal to a stranger on the street something about who we are. That has to come out in the music. And so do you think that carried through into, because I'm thinking so much about, like, why is it now that we're getting the story about Marsha P. Johnson? Why is it that we are not hearing, why don't we have much about her? There's documentaries about her. There's obviously films and writings about her. There's even interviews where now, especially because of things like YouTube, where we can find videos just by searching them, that there are little bits and blips of information. But Stonewall being such, there's a national monument that the government's trying to dismantle, that pays homage not only to Marsha and Sylvia and so many others, but also just like the existence of the gay liberation movement really starting, being credited as starting in that moment. Even though it definitely started before that, but like, this is our monument, right? But we don't have a lot of specific details, until now. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think it's that long tail. It's like, not only was Marsha, being abused, as we've talked about, and discriminated against, but then once you live that life, well, that discrimination keeps going. So it's not like your interviews are put around everywhere, right? It's not like we're getting taught this in history books or in history classes generally. And yeah, there might be a monument, but you've got to go see it. And even there, it doesn't say a lot about Marsha's life or quote her or anything like that. And so I think what we see is that, like, there's a lag, that we just don't know what happened 20 years ago very well. We're still figuring it out. I mean, even when we have people with verifiable quotes in the last 30 years that we can look up, it still doesn't always tell us the truth. The one that I always think about, the sort of like famous queer icon when I was in college and afterwards, the person people always talked about as being queer and inspiring them in their sexuality, their gender, their liberation, their performance, their aesthetics, was David Bowie. But I can remember David Bowie in the 80s telling Rolling Stone he was just a closeted heterosexual and that coming out as bisexual was the biggest mistake he'd ever made. Now, of course, that's a product of the time he was in. The 80s was incredibly conformist, right? And it was still violent, and it was no longer the 70s. People wanted to distance themselves from the liberation that Marsha helped bring to us, right? This sense of openness and possibility. Also in the early 80s, the AIDS crisis is coming in. So a lot of queer men, particularly, trying to distance themselves from that identity. But today, I think a lot of that has just been totally forgotten and lost. Young people today think of Bowie as an icon who was always out. How could Bowie have been anything else? But you and me and those of us who lived through those years remember how complicated it is and how only bits of that history filter down through to the history books, to the things that get cited everywhere, And you have to have people who remember in order to put together these kind of more comprehensive histories. And that's why I think Tourmaline was able to do this. That, she shared with us when we interviewed her how she'd been working inside queer, POC, trans spaces since the early 2000s, working with Fierce, working with the Campaign to Save the Peers in New York City, right? For me, I think that's how this work gets to be shared. It's what you're doing when you're traveling the country and telling everyone about all of your story, but also all of these ancestors, and going on every podcast. It's like, if we don't share this history, well, then nobody's going to know it.
Agreed. And, I also think of, like, there's no shortage of stories of artists who are, have news stories now that are queer, or we hear their story, and some of them are really, really tragic. I mean, I even think of, when it comes to transness, and not to get too sort of deep or morbid here, but, a brilliant artist, Teddy Pendergrass, who I think was paralyzed in a car accident, and so many people felt for him and supported him, and seemed to, I believe, moved by his tragic accident, where he did survive, but his life and his career were never the same. And apparently he was like on a huge meteoric rise. He had brilliant hits and things like that, but like that was that tragic accident that was kind of, probably a similar reaction, even though not the same outcome to our reaction to Aaliyah, who she was a star beforehand, but she was just getting started, and then her life was tragically cut short. Well, Teddy Pendergrass's career was tragically cut short in so many ways. But what a lot of people don't know, and it is out there now, is that he was in the car with a trans woman, and there's varying accounts, and he has said certain things, but it seems clear. It's easy to come to the conclusion that this was a date that he was on with this trans woman, that they got in this accident, and that changed his life. And because of the sneaking around, and what people would have had to have done at the time is sneak around, not be able to be seen, going here, going there, just to have privacy and enjoy the company of consenting adults. And doing that was so dangerous that you might turn the wrong way or go down the wrong street or have to drive in a certain way. And then suddenly you're in a car accident, and here the situation is that changes your whole career. And I don't know how he felt about that, obviously, but I can only imagine that was probably like I cannot even imagine like what his experiences were. But that's the depths or the lengths that people will sort of go to protect themselves and keep themselves safe. But they're also compelled to live their life as they would live. You know what I mean? Like if they're gay, they're going to be gay. If they're queer, if they're trans, it's going to come out.
Yeah, they're going to live that life, even if it costs them everything. I think of so many like trans guys who are only outed in death because they refused to get the kind of medical care they needed because they were afraid for a doctor to look at their body. Billy Tipton, the famous jazz musician, that's how he dies. There's not going to stop people from living their lives. They're just going to make those lives harder and more difficult, like they did for Marsha, But it didn't stop her, and that's why she is the icon that she is. And I think that's one of the things that comes through in Tourmaline's biography, even when we get to the hard parts at the end. It's hard not to think of the dark parts of the story, but, the joy and the liberation and the music is the heart of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that music was absolutely liberating. And the funny thing is, it's so interesting, because we didn't necessarily have I'll say enough, but we didn't have a plethora of out queer artists honestly, we still don't, that are mainstream. There's always queer artists, but I'm talking about, and the music industry was very different during the time that we're discussing, and even up until the mid-2000s, where everything was gatekept by the large music labels and record labels. And so they could decide who was out, what you would sing, what you would do, when you had to release music and when you couldn't release music. And so it was very, very rigid, all in for the benefit of the record labels. And we've heard, and this is kind of, the record labels sort of inherited the power that the studio system had, in the golden age of cinema, in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, leading into the 60s, where a studio would own a performer, an actor. And tell them, this is who you can date, this is who you can't date, and set up sort of fake relationships with people. And so that kind of, no wonder the music industry thought they could do the same thing, and they did, and they kind of still do, for so long. It's different now because people can release their own music without a music label, and it can go viral. But back then, people weren't speaking up for themselves. Nobody was like, I'm gay and I like it up the butt or whatever. They weren't able to talk about that on a record. So then we had to sort of rely on our divas, who weren't even necessarily gay, but they were talking about the empowerment and the liberation that we so desperately wanted to experience.
Right, and I mean that's like the heart of camp, right? Is taking up things that are meant for a straight audience or say things in a straight way and using them for queer liberation because we see ourselves in them. So I love that is something that we are able to do as a people, but I'm sad that it's something that we have to do as a people. In the early 2000s, when I was hanging around New York City, running around Brooklyn with a lot of musicians, I met this guy, a trans guy, who told me that when he was younger, in like the early 2000s, right around Avril Lavigne coming out, that he had been a
coming
drummer.
out. You mean being
or not
like
being as a musician, not as gay. Sorry,
okay.
To be clear,
I was like,
Avril
oh,
Lavigne,
wait a
to my
minute.
knowledge, not gay. But when she was coming up on the scene, that he was discovered by a bunch of producers who wanted him to release an album much like hers and be this kind of like pop punk look as a drummer, and they flew him to Chicago and they were trying to create this personality for him, and he realized in the course of that he was trans and like that he could not do this, that he could not be the star they wanted him to be and be himself, and so he dropped out of it entirely.
and
so
this is a trans man. He's they're trans masculine. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think that's, I mean, those kind of pressures, we're still facing them. We hear less about it, I think, a lot of ways. Or it gets, you get told to tone it down. You don't get told don't be gay. But it still happens to these stars.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and we see so many people who, I mean, we don't see a whole lot of out queer artists in mainstream anything. Not as the centerpiece, right?
Yeah. No.
I think now they've moved towards the Broadway model, the classic Broadway model of get a bunch of gays as backup dancers or behind the scenes or whatever, and like don't ask, don't tell, but not really, as the central piece. And it's so funny because I was watching the main event, watching Ricky Martin last month on the awards, the MTV, the VMAs, and so he came back and performed a bunch of his hits, and he sang live, and I don't even know how old Ricky Martin is, but he's got to be. I mean, he's probably 50 something, right?
Aging
I don't
like
know.
fine wine. That's all I'll say. However old he
Yeah,
is, it is.
he sure
fantastic.
is. But he was up there doing his thing and dancing. It was a great part of the show. I didn't see the whole show to be fair, but he was great. And he's up there singing about like she's living La Vida Loca. She makes you do this. She's so sexy. She's da 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 da. And honestly, it's the exact same. It comes off the same way. You know what I mean? Like it's no different. Like the vibe that he has. It's not like when he came out, he was like, she got, like, he didn't change, like, he's still the same person. Right. Yeah. And so, you can be an out gay guy and sing whatever songs. You can sing about, like, she's this, she's that, if that's what, I'm not, it's different because that was the song before he came out, but, like, it might be strange if he releases a new song about she's this, she's that. But
unless it was the gay she. If he was using the gay she.
Yeah, she's darling. She's yes. I'd be here for that,
I would too. I would listen to that album.
Yeah. So weird.
So much music. So much music. So much to talk about in general. There's just so much in this book, and I know we've gone so far afield today talking about all the music that we loved, all the music that's in the book, all the music Marsha herself made. I mean, Marsha was a musician. It's incredible to remember all of this and have it all together in this book. But we should save the rest of this conversation, I think, for our next episode, because we've got a lot more to get into. I think we promise you, the book is not all about Marsha and her experiences of music, though there is a lot of music in there. So we're going to save the rest for our next time.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we'll tease out is the talking about diving a little bit deeper into Marsha's trans experience and the difficulties about the conversation about her being able to assert who she is and grasping onto what she can as the whole notion of being out, period, let alone being out as trans, evolves over time, you know, because like you start this book in a time when nobody was out. And then you end up within a decade or two, people finally starting to come out and creep out, and then her identifying as trans, and still that was a rarity in that time, as you know. And so I'd love to dive a little bit more into that. But in the meantime, I'm going to ask you really quickly your queer icons, and in terms of music, and they can be either songs that were like songs and artists that were delivering queerness, or people who were actually queer talking about it. Like, who were yours?
I, as a child, was obsessed with Prince. I knew nothing about his actual sexual identity, gender, anything, but the way that he was so free, so incredible, so out there, so sexual, so fun, and that he did crazy things like changed his name to a symbol, which, you know, I didn't understand at the time was about copyright and control of his own artistry and all of that, but still seemed to me about asserting his own identity, being who he felt he wanted to be at any given moment, and the ability to change that and to move into a new self, a new name. That he just felt like the essence of liberation to me. Absolutely. How about you?
Absolutely, totally. And the symbol that he changed his name to wasn't just a symbol. It was a symbol. It was a sex symbol. It was a symbol of the quote male and female sexual iconography symbols with the circle and the arrow, or the circle and the cross through it, combined into one thing. And so, like, it wasn't even just like a male symbol or a female symbol. It was like an androgynous sort of, or bisexual symbol, you know, that. So I think, you know, that it could have been a V, or, you know, a squiggly line. You know, it was very.
He chose that.
Yeah, it's very clear that what he was doing. Prince was definitely a queer icon. I concur. He broke all the gender norms. Black men were not as able to participate in the heels. Like, Prince is probably the only mainstream black man that I remember going around with big hair and eyeliner and frilly outfits, whereas so many white guys were in the 80s. And let's be real, Prince was very early in that game of the frills and the big hair and the eyeliner. The hair metal and the rock and rollers who were white were doing that in the mid to late 80s. Prince was doing that from the late 70s into the 80s. And so he was a trendsetter.
At that time, it was like him, Sylvester, the New York Dolls. That was like the...
And Liberace.
Liberace! Good point. I forgot about Liberace.
Liberace's not rock and roll. But,
no,
you know,
but he's
still
a
obviously
musical
very...
queer icon. Yeah. So what about you? Queer icon?
You know, I mean, Prince is definitely also on my list. I would say, I mean, there's so many. I would say I'm going to say Patti LaBelle, who's an unsung queer icon, because we think about Cher, we think about Madonna, there for sure. And now it's really interesting. I think, like, when we think of folks like George Michael and Freddie Mercury, who were gay, came out, but their music and their career feels as though it belonged to the straights, because that was whatever was constructed about their public image, that's who it was for. Like, that's who consumed it. That's who it was targeted at. That's who it was contrived to appease. Whereas, you know, Patti LaBelle had drag queens doing Patti LaBelle like instantly, right? That was for everybody. And so I'm going to say Patti LaBelle, because she was so flamboyant in her image very early on. I mean, her hair, I still don't even know the shape that her hair was. It was like fins, y'all. It was like one of those fish what are those fish that are like spiny and brown and white? It was like fins,
like a lionfish.
Lionfish. Like, that was what her hair reminds me of, a lionfish. So I'm gonna say Patti LaBelle. She's not queer, but she has been around the queers very clearly. And the gays exalted her as a queer icon among many. And we know Cher, we know Madonna, we know so many. But like I think Patty is usually left out of that conversation, and so I want to bring her back in.
I love that. And if you at home do not know a lot of Patti LaBelle, this is not actually her. Well, she sang Lady Marmalade, but I have been recently obsessively watching the tribute to Patti LaBelle, An Evening of Stars, but specifically when Fantasia Barrino comes off the stage and sings Lady Marmalade like 2 inches from Patti LaBelle's face. It's an incredible moment, and I highly recommend, if you want to get all the feels, watch that video. Sorry, not about Patti LaBelle, not about queerness, not about Marsha P. Johnson, not about Tourmaline, just a fantastic...
No, watch it. No, she's a queer icon. There it is. Of course, it fits. We're talking about queer musical icons. Listen, we've gone long enough. We're so grateful for you listening to us. If you enjoyed this, please just share this. Let us know. Obviously, participate in the comments. Let us know, like, what your queer icons are, who you wish you'd had a chance to... Like, what do you think... the queer version of your favorite non-queer icons would be. Let us know in the comments. And if you've made it this far in the video, please put a pink heart in the comments so we know that you've made it this far into the comments. And
remember, we will be here next week and every Tuesday from now on because we are now weekly. So come back, subscribe,
it's true.
Follow.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. Well, thanks for listening to Queer 101. Y'all are amazing, and we'll see you on the next video.
We love you.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
This podcast is part of Pride House Media, hosted by us, Peppermint and Hugh, produced and edited by Josh Rosenzweig, with original music composed by Nell Balaban.
If you enjoyed this episode, then don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. And while you're there, leave us a rating and a review. It really helps others discover the show.
You can stay connected and join the conversation by following us at Peppermint 24/7 or write to us at questions@queer101podcast.com.
Thank you for listening. And remember, our history is your history. Stay proud, stay curious, and we'll see you next time on Queer 101.